The airport buzzed with energy as travelers hurried through terminals, rolling suitcases behind them and checking their phones for flight updates. The scent of freshly brewed coffee and the faint hum of announcements overhead filled the air. Among the crowd was Ava Mitchell, a confident and poised 17-year-old black girl, holding her first-class ticket tightly in her hand. Today was special. Her father, Jonathan Mitchell, had surprised her with a first-class ticket for their family vacation, a well-earned gift after she had excelled in school. It was her first time flying first class, and she had dreamed about the luxurious experience ever since her father told her. As she walked toward the gate, her phone buzzed with a message from her dad. "Enjoy your flight, sweetheart. You deserve this." Ava smiled, tucking her phone into her bag as she reached the boarding area. The boarding call for first-class passengers echoed through the intercom, and she stepped forward, handing her ticket to the gate agent. Ava stepped forward with confidence, handing her first-class boarding pass to the flight attendant at the gate. The attendant, a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes named Linda, barely glanced at the ticket before hesitating. She gave Ava a once-over, her expression shifting from neutral to skeptical in an instant. "Are you sure you're in the right line, miss?" Linda asked, tilting her head slightly. Ava furrowed her brows. "Yes, this is my boarding pass." She pointed at the bold letters. "First class, seat 2A. Linda took the ticket but didn't scan it right away. Instead, she gave Ava another look, as if trying to find a reason why she didn't belong there. "And who purchased this ticket for you?" she asked, her tone laced with suspicion. Ava's stomach twisted. "Why would that matter?" "My father did," she answered, keeping her voice even. Linda sighed and finally scanned the ticket. The system beeped, confirming her first-class seat, but the woman still seemed unconvinced. "Go ahead," Linda said, but there was a slight edge to her voice, as if she expected something to go wrong. As Ava walked down the jet bridge, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something bigger. She had no idea just how far this would escalate. Ava stepped onto the plane, her heart racing with a mix of excitement and unease. The first-class cabin was everything she had imagined: spacious leather seats, ambient lighting, and attendants ready to serve with a smile. She glanced down at her ticket again. Seat 2A. As she moved to her seat, a tall blonde flight attendant named Claire suddenly stepped in her path. "Excuse me, miss. First-class passengers only," Claire said, her eyes scanning Ava from head to toe. Ava blinked. "I am a first-class passenger." She held up her boarding pass again, keeping her voice steady. Claire barely looked at it before folding her arms. "Are you sure? First class is reserved for premium travelers." Passengers nearby began to glance over, their whispers growing. A man in a business suit raised an eyebrow, and a woman across the aisle shot Ava a sympathetic look. Ava felt heat rise to her cheeks, but she refused to let them see her falter. "My seat is 2A, she repeated, her tone sharper this time. Claire sighed dramatically, snatched the ticket from Ava's hand, and glanced at it for a longer than necessary moment. Then, reluctantly, she stepped aside. "Fine, have a seat," she said dismissively. "But I'll be checking with the gate to verify this." Ava clenched her fists as she slid into her seat. She could feel the weight of judgmental stares around her. It wasn't enough that she had a ticket. She still had to prove she belonged. And something told her this wasn't over yet. Ava sank into her first-class seat, but any excitement she once had was quickly fading. The luxurious leather felt cold against her skin, a reminder that she was being watched, judged, and doubted. She could hear the whispers around her. "Did she really pay for that seat?" a woman muttered behind her. "Maybe it was an upgrade mistake," a man in a suit whispered to his seatmate. Ava exhaled slowly, gripping the armrest. She refused to let them get to her. Moments later, Claire returned, this time with another flight attendant, a supervisor named Mark. He held a tablet in his hands, his expression polite but firm. "Miss, we just need to confirm something," Mark said, giving her a forced smile. Ava's patience was wearing thin. "Confirm what? My seat? My ticket? I already showed it to Claire." Mark shifted uncomfortably. "We just need to double-check with the airline records. It's standard procedure." Ava's jaw clenched. Standard procedure? She had watched at least a dozen first-class passengers board without a single issue. "Is that so?" Ava said, crossing her arms. "Then why didn't you stop anyone else?" Mark hesitated. Claire pursed her lips. The tension in the cabin was thick, passengers pretending not to eavesdrop while clearly listening. Then, before Mark could respond, a deep voice cut through the silence. "Is there a problem here?" Ava's heart jumped as she turned toward the voice. A tall man in a dark suit had just stepped onto the plane, his presence commanding immediate attention. Ava's father, and no one on this plane knew just who he really was. Silence fell over the first-class cabin as Jonathan Mitchell stepped forward. His dark tailored suit, polished shoes, and the air of quiet authority made him impossible to ignore. Ava felt a rush of relief, but also knew her father wasn't here just to comfort her. He had sensed something was wrong. Claire straightened, her confidence wavering. Mark, the supervisor, cleared his throat nervously. "Sir, this is a private discussion. We're just verifying this young lady's seat," Mark said, forcing a polite smile. Jonathan's eyes, sharp and unreadable, moved from Mark to Ava, then back to the flight attendants. "Verifying?" His voice was calm but carried a weight that made everyone listen. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've already decided she doesn't belong here." Mark shifted uncomfortably. "It's just a security measure, sir." Jonathan let out a slow breath, then pulled out his phone. He tapped the screen twice, and within seconds the color drained from Mark's face. Ava watched as Mark's eyes widened in shock, then flickered to Claire, who suddenly looked pale. They had just realized who they were dealing with. Jonathan Mitchell wasn't just Ava's father. He was the owner of the airline. Mark's grip on his tablet tightened as he processed the shocking revelation. Claire's confidence crumbled instantly, her once dominant posture shrinking under the weight of her mistake. Ava watched as her father's presence shifted the entire atmosphere in the first-class cabin. Passengers who had been whispering now fell silent, their curiosity turning into realization. "Mr. Mitchell, I had no idea," Mark stammered, his face pale. Jonathan's eyes remained unforgiving. "No, you didn't. But that's exactly the problem, isn't it?" Claire swallowed hard. "Sir, I was just following protocol." "Protocol?" Jonathan repeated, his tone edged with disbelief. "Tell me, did you stop every first-class passenger to verify their seat, or just my daughter?" Claire's mouth opened, but no words came out. Ava's chest swelled with a mix of vindication and frustration. This wasn't just about her seat. It was about how people like Claire assumed who did and didn't belong in spaces like these. Passengers shifted uncomfortably. Some who had judged Ava earlier now looked away, embarrassed. Jonathan's voice was measured but sharp. "I built this airline to serve all customers with dignity and respect. What I just witnessed is the opposite of that." Mark nodded quickly, desperate to salvage the situation. "Mr. Mitchell, please allow me to personally apologize." But Jonathan wasn't done. He turned to Ava, his expression softening. "Are you okay?" he asked her gently. Ava nodded, but the truth was she wasn't sure. This moment wasn't just about an apology. It was about consequences. Ava looked around the cabin, feeling the weight of every stare on her. The same passengers who had questioned her presence now sat in awkward silence, shifting in their seats. Jonathan turned his gaze back to Mark and Claire, his patience wearing thin. "I built this airline with a commitment to fairness and inclusion," he said firmly. "Yet here we are, dealing with an employee who treated my daughter as if she didn't belong. Tell me, what exactly do you think should happen next?" Mark looked completely rattled, struggling for an answer. Claire, on the other hand, stood frozen, realizing that she had gone from authority to accused in a matter of minutes. "Sir, it was never my intention to offend," she finally muttered, voice unsteady. Jonathan let out a slow, measured breath. Intentions mean nothing when the actions say otherwise. Ava watched as her father's words landed like a heavy weight on the flight crew. This wasn't just a lecture. This was a moment of reckoning. Just then, another higher-ranking airline executive stepped onto the plane, alerted by the situation. A tall woman in a navy blue blazer, with a calm but authoritative demeanor, she glanced between Jonathan and the nervous attendants. "Mr. Mitchell, I was informed there was an issue?" she asked, her voice even. Jonathan gestured toward Ava. "My daughter was humiliated for simply taking the seat she paid for. These two," he motioned to Mark and Claire, "thought she didn't belong and felt the need to verify her legitimacy, while no other first-class passenger was questioned." The executive's expression darkened as she turned to Claire and Mark. Is this true? She asked sharply. Claire's face burned red, while Mark dropped his gaze. Ava's heart pounded. This was it. The moment where words had consequences. The executive's sharp gaze didn't waver as she awaited an answer. The silence stretched, thick with tension. Mark hesitated, shifting on his feet before finally muttering, "It was a misunderstanding." Jonathan's expression didn't change, but Ava could feel the controlled disappointment radiating from him. The executive folded her arms. "A misunderstanding?" she repeated, her tone skeptical. "Then tell me, Mark, did you question every first-class passenger this way, or just this young woman?" Claire swallowed hard, her eyes darting toward the passengers, as if searching for support. But none came. Those who had once whispered and doubted Ava now sat uncomfortably, some even looking ashamed. Mark opened his mouth but hesitated. The truth was undeniable. No, just her. The executive exhaled sharply and turned to Jonathan. "Mr. Mitchell, I sincerely apologize. This does not reflect our airline's values." Jonathan gave a small nod. "I'd like to believe that." He turned his gaze to Claire. "But clearly, not everyone here shares those values." Claire's face paled. "Sir, please, I didn't mean to." Jonathan cut her off with a sharp look. "You didn't mean to assume my daughter didn't belong? You didn't mean to embarrass her in front of an entire cabin?" His voice was calm, but every word hit like a hammer. Ava could see the shift in Claire's posture, the moment she realized she had gone too far. The executive straightened. "Mr. Mitchell, I assure you, there will be an internal review. We take this seriously." Jonathan's gaze flickered to Ava, then back to the executive. "Good, because I won't tolerate this, especially not in a company that bears my name." The entire cabin held its breath. Ava wasn't sure what would happen next, but one thing was certain. This wasn't over yet. The tension in the cabin was almost suffocating. Every passenger, every flight attendant, and even the pilots in the cockpit felt the weight of the moment. No one dared to speak. Jonathan's eyes remained fixed on the executive. His voice, though calm, carried undeniable authority. "This isn't just about an internal review," he said. "This is about the culture of this airline. If my daughter, the daughter of the owner, can be treated this way, imagine how many others have been humiliated without anyone to stand up for them." The executive nodded, her expression serious. "You're absolutely right, Mr. Mitchell, and I take full responsibility for ensuring that changes are made immediately." Claire's breathing was uneven. She looked at Jonathan, then at Ava, her voice barely above a whisper. I truly am sorry." Ava studied the woman for a moment. Was it regret or just fear of consequences? Either way, the apology felt hollow. "Sorry doesn't erase the experience," Ava replied, her voice steady. "It doesn't change the way you made me feel." The executive turned to Claire and Mark. "Effective immediately, both of you will be placed under review. Report to HR when we land." A murmur rippled through the cabin. Passengers exchanged glances. Justice was being served right in front of them. Claire visibly deflated, realizing that her actions had real consequences. Mark swallowed hard, nodding stiffly. Jonathan exhaled and turned to Ava, his gaze softened. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" Ava nodded. "I am now." As Jonathan finally took his seat beside her, the tension in the air began to ease. But one thing was certain. This was a flight no one on board would ever forget. As the plane finally prepared for takeoff, the cabin remained unnervingly quiet. It was as if everyone was still processing what had just happened. Ava, now seated beside her father, took a deep breath, trying to push down the lingering emotions. Jonathan turned to her. "You did well, Ava." She looked at him, surprised. "But I didn't do anything." He smiled knowingly. "You held your ground. You didn't lash out. You let them reveal their own mistakes. That takes strength." Ava thought about that. For a moment she had felt powerless, forced to sit in silence while others dictated whether she deserved to be there. But now, seeing Claire's face pale with regret and Mark sit stiffly, avoiding her gaze, she realized something. She wasn't the one who should have felt out of place. They were. The flight attendants moved about, resuming their duties, but there was a noticeable shift in their behavior. They were more cautious, more polite. It wasn't just about her father being the owner. It was about the lesson they had just witnessed. A man across the aisle, the same one who had been eyeing her suspiciously earlier, cleared his throat. "Excuse me, miss?" Ava turned, raising an eyebrow. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry for not speaking up sooner. That wasn't right. Ava studied him for a moment, then nodded. Thank you. A woman in the row ahead turned as well. You handled yourself well, dear. You belong here just like anyone else. Ava felt a lump rise in her throat. The very same people who had judged her were now acknowledging their mistake. Jonathan squeezed her hand lightly. Change doesn't happen overnight, but moments like this, they make a difference. Ava nodded, feeling a sense of pride and relief settle in. She wasn't just her father's daughter, she was her own person, and she had made an impact. As the plane ascended, the tension in the cabin gradually eased, replaced by the soft hum of engines and quiet murmurs of passengers settling in. Ava leaned back in her seat, her fingers tracing the smooth leather of the armrest. Jonathan glanced at her. Lost in thought? Ava nodded. Yeah, just thinking about everything. Jonathan chuckled lightly. It's a lot to process, I know. She turned to him, her expression serious. Dad, does this happen to other people all the time? People who don't have someone like you to step in? His smile faded slightly, replaced by a thoughtful look. Unfortunately, yes, more often than you'd think. Ava swallowed. The realization hit her harder than she expected. Today, she had been questioned, embarrassed, made to feel like she didn't belong, but she had powerful protection. How many others had faced the same humiliation with no one to defend them? It's not fair, she muttered. Jonathan nodded. It isn't, but that's why we have to keep pushing for change. Ava exhaled deeply. I just don't get why people judge so quickly. Jonathan looked at her, his eyes filled with understanding and wisdom. Because it's easier. Assumptions save people the trouble of learning the truth, but that doesn't mean we have to accept it. The plane suddenly jolted slightly, a minor pocket of turbulence shaking the cabin. A few passengers gasped, clutching their armrests. Ava tensed, but Jonathan remained calm, his grip on her hand steady. It's just turbulence, sweetheart, it passes. She looked at him, something clicking in her mind. Maybe this moment was just turbulence, too. A rough patch, a shake in the journey, but not the destination. She wasn't defined by Claire's judgment, she knew who she was, and from now on, she'd make sure the world did too. As the turbulence settled, Ava glanced around the cabin. The whispers had faded, replaced by an uneasy silence. She could still feel the weight of lingering stares, but this time they carried a different emotion, remorse. Just as she reached for her headphones, a soft voice interrupted her thoughts. Miss Mitchell? Ava looked up to see Claire, the flight attendant who had caused all this trouble, standing before her. Her usual air of authority was gone. Instead, she looked hesitant, almost nervous. Jonathan sat up straighter, his expression unreadable. Claire took a slow breath, then spoke. I wanted to apologize. Truly. I misjudged you, and there's no excuse for that. Ava studied her carefully. Claire's hands were clasped tightly, her posture tense. This wasn't the same woman who had smugly questioned her just an hour ago. You didn't just misjudge me, Ava said calmly. You embarrassed me. You made me feel like I didn't belong. Claire flinched, guilt flashing across her face. I know, and I hate that I did that. I let my assumptions guide me instead of just treating you like any other passenger. I can't take it back, but I can promise to do better. Jonathan watched silently, letting Ava take control of the moment. Ava took a deep breath. She had every right to be angry, every right to refuse this apology. But holding on to that anger wouldn't change what had happened. What mattered now was making sure it didn't happen again. I hope you mean that, she finally said. Because next time it might be someone who doesn't have a dad like mine to stand up for them. Claire nodded quickly. I do, and I'll prove it. Ava didn't smile, but she gave a small nod. Good. As Claire turned and walked away, Jonathan looked at his daughter with pride. You're handling this better than most adults would, he murmured. Ava exhaled, staring out the window. I just want people to be better. Jonathan squeezed her hand. And that, Ava, is exactly how real change starts. As Claire walked away, the atmosphere in the first-class cabin shifted again. Passengers who had previously stayed silent now seemed more alert, exchanging quiet glances as if debating whether to say something. Then, the man in the gray suit, one of the first to look at Ava with suspicion, cleared his throat. Miss, I just want to say, that was impressive. His voice was hesitant, but genuine. You handled that with a lot more grace than most would have. Ava turned to him, surprised. A woman sitting across the aisle nodded. I agree. If I were in your shoes, I don't think I would have been as calm. Jonathan smiled knowingly. He had seen this before, a shift in perception, a moment of reflection. Ava, however, wasn't sure how to respond. Did these people actually mean what they were saying? Or were they just trying to ease their guilt for not stepping in sooner? I appreciate that, she said carefully, but I just hope next time people won't need to be reminded to do the right thing. A few heads lowered, shame evident in their expressions. Jonathan leaned back, watching the scene unfold. You know, he said, his voice thoughtful, it's easy to stay quiet when something unfair happens to someone else, but silence isn't neutral. It's a choice. The words settled over the passengers like a weight. The woman across the aisle sighed. You're right. She glanced at Ava. I should have said something sooner. Ava gave a small nod. Now you know for next time. Jonathan smiled, proud of his daughter. She wasn't just demanding respect for herself, she was holding others accountable. And in that moment, Ava realized something. She had changed more than just her own experience. She had changed the way everyone in that cabin would act the next time they saw injustice. As the flight continued, Ava leaned back in her seat, her mind still racing. She had stood up for herself, forced people to confront their biases, and even made Claire apologize. But something still didn't sit right. She turned to her father. Dad, why does it take something like this for people to see the truth? Jonathan sighed, his expression thoughtful. Because change is uncomfortable, Ava. People like comfort. They like familiarity. Challenging their beliefs? That's work, and most don't want to do it unless they have to. Ava frowned. But it's not hard to just treat people fairly. Jonathan gave a knowing smile. You'd think so, but fairness means giving up control for some people, and control is something they hold on to tightly. Ava let his words sink in. She had seen it firsthand, how quickly people assumed, how slow they were to correct themselves. If her father hadn't been who he was, would Claire have ever admitted her mistake? Would the other passengers have spoken up? She exhaled. It's frustrating, Jonathan nodded. It is, but that's why we keep fighting, sweetheart. Because every time we demand better, we make it harder for the next person to get away with ignorance. Ava stared out the window, watching the clouds pass. Maybe her father was right. Maybe she hadn't just stood up for herself. Maybe she had pushed people to think, even if just a little. Jonathan placed a reassuring hand on hers. You're learning something today that most people don't understand until they're much older. You can't control how people treat you, but you can control how you respond. Ava looked at him, a small smile forming, and I responded like someone who belongs here. Jonathan grinned. Exactly. If this story moved you, share it with others. Let's spread the message that everyone deserves respect, no matter where they sit or who they are. Have you ever experienced or witnessed something like this? Comment below and let's start a conversation about standing up for what's right. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more powerful stories that challenge perspectives and inspire change. As the plane cruised through the sky, Ava finally allowed herself to relax. The tension that had gripped her since boarding was slowly melting away. She had stood her ground, faced prejudice head-on, and emerged stronger. A flight attendant, not Claire, but another crew member, approached their seats with a warm smile. She carefully set down 2 glasses of sparkling water. Compliments of the airline, Mr. Mitchell and Miss Mitchell. On behalf of the crew, we sincerely apologize for what happened today. It shouldn't have. Ava exchanged a glance with her father. He gave a slight nod, letting her take the lead. She looked back at the flight attendant and after a moment replied, Thank you. I just hope that in the future, no one else has to go through this. The woman nodded, her expression sincere. We'll do better. As she walked away, Jonathan chuckled softly. You know, I think you just taught an entire airplane a lesson today. Ava smirked. I think so too. The weight of the experience still lingered, but Ava felt different now, stronger, more confident. She had always been proud of herself, but today she had proven to everyone else what she already knew. She belonged. Jonathan leaned back in his seat, studying his daughter with admiration. You know, Ava, this is just the beginning for you. People like you don't just experience change, you create it. Ava smiled, taking in his words. As the clouds drifted by outside, she realized something important. This wasn't just a flight. It was a moment that would stay with her forever. And next time someone tried to question where she belonged, she wouldn't just prove them wrong. She'd make sure they never questioned someone like her again. If this story moved you, share it with others. Let's spread the message that everyone deserves respect, no matter where they sit or who they are. Have you ever experienced or witnessed something like this? Comment below and let's start a conversation about standing up for what's right. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more powerful stories that challenge perspectives and inspire change.